I'm thrilled. Why is it important for me to be here? Because they let me in.
I used to think that calling Canada a communist country was insane. And every time I'd hear it, I'd be like, okay, chill out. It's not that bad. Until I realized that we were looking at the wrong version of it. Modern communism, after researching it extensively at this point, I am officially fully convinced, and I'll explain it to you, but don't just listen to my words. I want you to take it from theirs. I'm Jasmine Lane. Like, share, subscribe, comment your thoughts down below. Hype this video or anything at all you can to help in the algorithm, because YouTube does not like these topics at all. The Prime Minister had one of the most uncomfortable, bizarre appearances at the Juno Awards. We're also going to be talking about the NDP leadership race and a new affordability announcement where Mark Carney was heckled throughout his entire press conference today. All that and so much more coming up.
I do have to say, though, that when I saw Mark Carney's speech at Davos, did you see that? I felt a childlike pride. I felt like he was Canada's dad sticking up to the bullies. I was like, that's my Prime Minister. And then I saw him posing with the cast of Heated Rivalry, and just my nervous system just relaxed.
Everything about this is so weird on a psychological level where, you have a national cultural event that is funded, promoted, and broadcast at scale that is echoing the same messaging you would typically hear in a political campaign or even from political surrogates, right? And it's not just mentioning, oh, we have Prime Minister Mark Carney here, that's cool. It is endorsing the emotional narrative around him. That's very odd. And it's also in a setting where there's no pushback, opposing views, and no accountability at all. It's just applause for how they want you to feel and think about the Prime Minister. And it's not like this is the first time we've had one at the Junos. Typically, though, events like this, like cultural national events like this, keep distance from overt political messaging, especially messaging that is tied to his speech at Davos at the World Economic Forum Summit. The World Economic Forum, which is associated with global elites, which is associated with economic coordination, policy, direction, and it gets so much worse.
This man is a blessing. You guys are so fortunate.
Didn't see language there. I also think it's very odd when she says, I haven't been to Canada in years. I live in the States, and you know what's happening there. Why do you still live there then? You have a property in British Columbia. I don't know why you still choose to live in the States. I wonder why that is. And then to just the narrative framing of that is also really odd. Like, you're at a music awards ceremony. Why are you even talking about this stuff? Go up and say thank you for the award and leave it at that. And I think that that's also the part that a lot of people don't want to say out loud, or they don't even realize that it's happening because it's so subconscious. When cultural spaces start to reinforce political figures emotionally, you are literally shaping perceptions of reality, right?
But I've never seen it this acute. I've never seen it this vicious. You mentioned some of the personal insults towards any Canadians who might be on a U.S. sports team or something. Why is anti-Americanism at an all-time high? That's just not my opinion. There's polls that show.
Oh no,
it too.
I think the polls show that it's 90% of Canadians have a negative opinion of the U.S.
I don't know if it's that high, but I'd be willing to believe it. And it's actually higher in some polls than antipathy towards China, communist China. What's going on?
I don't know. You'll have to ask the Canadian people.
You've been here to observe for 11 months. What is it? Is it natural? Is it part of a?
It's not natural at all. I mean, the good thing. I mean, that's the public opinion.
And it's just really weird when you see from media, culture, entertainment, all of these spaces start sending the exact same emotional message. You don't need to convince people logically. You can't disprove it with facts because they already feel like they know the answer because the answer has been told to them. And that's exactly why it matters so much, because it's not about one comment or several comments coming from these people in these really odd settings for these comments to be made. But it's when praise like that completely changes the relationship between people and power, coming from people who are, by their own admission, completely shielded from the damage, the consequences of bad policy that the everyday Canadian watching this feels and faces in their own lives. And rather than to scrutinize a leader, which, by the way, is healthy in democracy and functioning democracies, leaders are supposed to be under pressure. They work for the people. They answer to the people. That is their responsibility. And pay attention. This is how people talk about authority that they do not question. And that's the interpretation that they want you to have as well. And that is some of the scariest shit I think I've seen in a really long time. Carney was also seated beside Joni Mitchell the entire event. So I'm very curious how deep those ties go. Joni Mitchell has long been an activist when it comes to climate-related things, you know, feminism, all of that stuff. And I just, the fact that people start cheering when she's like, I have a Chinese word for happy all over my clothes. Huh? What is this?
Almost anytime. And this is, we're the third largest exporter of music in the world. Canada's third largest exporter of music in the world. It's a huge industry, but really at the core of it, it's our stories, it's our emotions, it's our core, and it's our heart at a time when the world really needs more of Canada. So it's important to support it. I mean, from Joni all the way to as I said, Fred's a moment ago, like we've got the whole spectrum. So I'm a fan. I'm thrilled. Why is it important for me to be here? Because they let me in.
And to be clear, there's nothing weird at all about Mark Carney being in attendance. There's nothing weird about him presenting an award or even sitting beside Joni Mitchell at the end of the day. What is weird is the fanfare around him being there. The false prophet, around him being there. That is very odd. That's not normal in Canada, especially. And if praise like that exists in places where nobody questions it, you don't need to control what people think. You just need to tell them how to feel. I've said this so many times. I'm a liberal because I'm a good person, and I'm a good person because I'm a liberal. That's as deep as it gets for a lot of people.
There's a slanted perspective there where you get the downtown Toronto folks decide on behalf of everybody what is Canadian, what is non-Canadian. And that's ridiculous because Canadians can have reasonable disagreements about what is or is not Canadian. We're spending millions of dollars, but worse than the money that we're spending is just the fact that they are manipulating algorithms to put their agenda to the forefront anytime that anybody does a Google search.
And if you're more cynical, you could also say these bills also promote certain media like CBC and then try to control or squash or basically force into bankruptcy independent media outlets that have voices that they can't control as easily. And that's the Online News Act. Close to 100 have already failed since that bill received royal ascension. That's over a couple of years now. And it's done nothing but decimate media outlets in Canada. And put many of them at the begging bowl, which also puts them at the control of the government as they have to beg for funding from the government.
My goodness, it is so eye-opening, the juxtaposition between what we were told to feel at the Juno Awards, which is, everything's so great, we're so lucky, compared to what people were told to feel at the NDP leadership convention where Avi Lewis won.
I'm going to close this campaign the way I started. We're done being on the menu, and we're done with the ruling class eating us alive. It's time we take our seats at the table and eat the damn rich!
Instead of reassurance, which the Liberals frequently do, despite not having evidence to suggest that that should be a takeaway, it's resentment, and it's not comfort, it's a lot of anger, but it still is not grounded in solutions, right? And personally, this is why I'm conservative. This is why this sort of stuff doesn't work on me, because I really care about outcomes. And none of this acknowledges or addresses outcomes because it's all grounded in how you feel. And it's how you end up with people cheering and chanting, "Eat the rich," instead of asking, why on earth can't I be one of them? And that is exactly how you emotionally anchor people to a narrative. Welcome to human psychology. You no longer need to prove it. You no longer need to explain yourself or even show results. You just need to keep reinforcing that feeling. But it is rather laughable that the very people who are reinforcing this feeling are talking about, cost of living crisis. They're talking about all of these things as though they're outsiders to it.
The Prime Minister is very popular at the moment. He's a smart guy, and most Canadians still want to give him the benefit of the doubt. That's fair. But I think when you connect the dots, his moves do not add up to the vision that Canadians truly want and deserve in this perilous moment. $500 billion in a decade for weapons to make Canada a major arms exporter in a war-torn world. Slashing our cherished public services. Sweeping aside Indigenous rights. Full steam ahead, no regulations on AI. And pipelines. In the last federal election, Canadians voted to say no to Trump and Trumpism. What they're getting instead is our government following the U.S. into a future of wars, fossil fuels, austerity, and job-killing generative AI.
There's a question of energy development. And it may be that if the port in the north, whether it's Churchill or somewhere else, ends up being the destination for more oil and gas exports, that's something that we in the federal NDP do not think serves Canadians. And we think that we need to accelerate the transition to a more stable, secure, and safe economy and a more independent Canadian economy, which actually means not shipping our raw resources elsewhere, but using Canadian materials to create good unionized Canadian jobs across all sectors. And renewable energy can be a major focus of major investments here.
Rock solid commitment to the fundamental values, which are about dealing with the horrific inequality in our society.
They're blaming corporations, inequality, people who are successful in spite of the difficulties in this country, while actively supporting policies that helped create this exact same outcome in the first place.
Our plan is to Trump-proof the economy by investing massively in Canadian economic independence, using the unmatched power of public ownership to ensure the fundamentals of a good life. A network of public providers for food, phones, and internet. A public housing developer and public construction companies to build millions of non-market homes. A 21st century electrical grid, an EV bus revolution, and a heat pump in every home, built with Canadian steel, creating tens of thousands of unionized jobs.
You know what else I thought was pretty telling about this? The fact that after Avi Lewis won and the cameras pan out, I didn't see a single Canadian flag, but I did see a few others. I don't know, do you see the same thing that I am?
To me, someone who comes from the Soviet Union, is mind-boggling. And you were talking earlier about why this woke ideology is so dangerous to the West. It is because people in other parts of the world are not teaching their young children to hate their own country. And if you continue to do this, how is the West going to do in the battle of civilizations? Because that's what we're in, right? The Chinese want to thrive, the Russians want to thrive, and they're teaching their children to be strong, to be confident, to go out there to learn science instead of, equity and diversity. And a bridge doesn't work very well if it's built on diversity instead of math. So
And I'll ask you, what kind of a country are we building, truly? When you have people no longer seeing each other as individuals, but as categories, groups, labels, positions. Somebody is more than me, not because they actually are, but because I've been instructed that they are, and I should feel guilty about who I am.
Hello, I was standing here with my gender equity card before you called on the previous speaker.
Yesterday, this card was used in an inappropriate manner. And while I understand in Ontario we note this as equity, even if this was also used inappropriately in terms of gender. I want everyone to be mindful that these cards for individuals like myself who identify as a Black woman have no value outside of this space.
This is a no question debate. I call this question, Madam and Chairs. Thank you.
Your point's quite well made, Speaker. I'll again thank delegates not to call me Madam Chair or Madame la Présidente. I'm a non-binary person. My pronouns are they, them, and their. Chair is sufficient.
The irony of all of these people who, I don't begrudge them for falling victims to a system that was designed and is being executed exactly as it was supposed to. But it's so ironic to have these people go up on stage at a political convention in Canada and talk about privilege, inequality, unfairness, their race, all of these things that nobody except for them really cares about in the grand scheme of things. That's not to say that there aren't awful people in the world. Of course there are. But the vast majority of people really don't care at all. And the vast majority of people also condemn those awful people, right? And the fact that they're doing this, it just reeks of privilege. You are so privileged to have every single one of your needs so very much met that you have the ability to go to a political convention and voice these concerns. That's privilege. That's privilege right there. To think that you deserve more than people of a different skin color than you, that's privilege. To think that you deserve to be heard over people of a different gender than you, that is privilege. And people who are not privileged, people who are truly living with inequality in their lives, they don't get to voice those concerns. They don't get to think about those concerns because those concerns matter far less than actual survival. And it is rather interesting to see that it's not the everyday person who gets behind this sort of thing. It is people who believe truly, they have been conditioned into believing that there was something wrong with them. And now they are powerful, more powerful than you because of what it was that was wrong with them. Their identity has defined their opportunities. The success has been framed as to whether or not you're privileged or oppressed, and your voice is weighted differently. All of those things completely fundamentally change how you see yourself in the world around you. And for some, it creates pressure to constantly justify their position or to create a sense that no matter what they do, it won't be enough. And it's just so rich that the very people who have championed equality, diversity, rights for so many years are the same people who have created the most division, vitriolic chaos in recent years, and they don't even see it, right? Like, you are so convoluted by this ideology that you don't even see that nothing you're doing leads to confidence, nothing you're doing leads to growth, and it definitely does not lead to building a meaningful or independent life. And I mean, case in point, they just voted in a guy who doesn't want you to have a meaningful, independent life. He wants you to have everything run by the state.
One of the greatest dangers we face as a country. People misunderstand communism. Communism today is not the communism of our grandparents. It is never going to come to pass in America where somebody says, I want to seize the means of production and think that's actually a winnable national race for president. That is never going to happen. It has too much baggage, and the people who want that system, they understand that. So what they know they have to do going into the future is you have to seize the minds of the people in charge of production. The Democratic Party was doing that very successfully under the Biden administration and previous to that, frankly, because they were putting their people, hardened activists, in board seats all over the country at Fortune 500 companies. And they have actually been the biggest issue to us getting very sensible problems solved with major corporations. In fact, I got a call yesterday from a company, it was off the record, but it's a big company. They're top 100 companies in the world. And their CEO was telling me about what a problem one board member is because they are just a crazy activist and they will not drop the issues that they want the company to essentially spend a bunch of money on. And they're all they're like, transgender kids stuff, all the fringiest things. The left did that very intentionally and the right just stood by and did nothing. And one of the dynamics that's been explained to me many times by CEOs who were actually very happy I've done what I've done. And there's a shocking number that have been very happy I've done what I've done with DEI, where they're like relieved to get the phone call and they're like, I was hoping you would target us.
Because they realize they can't manage a company
because they know
DEI.
It's crazy. They know it's crazy and they need an off-ramp. This group of people, they have this weird social structure that is so controlled by the left. And they've told me before, one of the biggest reasons it was able to happen is the right had no pressure that they were bringing anywhere in the corporate world.
Now, following Avi Lewis's win, I had posted just a few months ago, I was giving a speech in Manitoba rejecting socialism and government dependency. today in Manitoba, an openly socialist/modern communist leader was elected to represent the federal NDP. And I was quite shocked by the large amount of comments of people saying, you know, you obviously don't even know what important words mean. That's so damaging to your credibility. Funny enough, these are the same people who would probably call anybody who disagrees with them an ist or a phobe, almost as though they don't know what important words mean. And so many people who then were like, well, which social programs do you want to abolish? Literally never said that at all. I said that we should have a great economy so we can afford the social programs that governments want to promise in order to get reelected. Though, having said that, what would I abolish immediately? Probably MAID would be my first one. But I was very surprised by the amount of people who genuinely don't know what modern communism is, because it's very real. And if you research it, honestly, even traditional communism, there are so many things that you can connect dots back to government policy in Canada. But nobody ever talks about it because I guess it's not as scary. It's always under the guise of protection and safety and equality. So it sounds good, but it's not good. It's actually very communist, what the end goal and result of a lot of these policies are. I mean, if you want to just think about how communism was initially defined, it was central planning, no private ownership, government seizing businesses. And of course, there's a lot of details to it, but even with those three examples that were previously widely rejected, a lot of that actually has come to fruition or is being discussed openly under the guise of this is progress, right? When it would have been rejected. In other countries, it is rejected. And how did this all happen in Canada? The land of the free, the land where slaves escaped through the Underground Railroad to. And it wasn't dramatic and it wasn't overnight. It was many years in the making. And I really do think that the NDP convention just shone a huge light into how successful that was, because it was through public programs expanding, regulation increasing, government taking a much larger role, an unacceptable role in the private market, housing, energy, infrastructure, in all of these things, in ownership of various things. It's not owned by, you know, the province of Ontario, it's owned by the government of Canada. We see that all the time here, and that used to be very odd, and it's always framed as fairness, safety, stability, and you don't need to force people to obey and comply when you are able to influence them to obey and comply. And that's where the media aspect comes in. That's where culture comes in. When all of those spaces start reinforcing trust in leadership, distrust of markets, distrust of certain industries, and suspicion of success outside of the government, vilification, distrust of political opposition, of ideas contrary to what the leading party wants us to do, social punishment of dissent, condemnation, boycotts. You have successfully, through the technology that we have today, been able to control the public opinion, the outcomes of everything that it is that you want. You know, and even today, we've talked about this a lot, the emotional messaging, cultural reinforcement, political rhetoric, policy direction, and together they all point to the same thing, which is normalization of these things that are not normal. Like, this is not natural or organic human behavior.
And we reduced by half, we're still building the essential infrastructure. Through the Build Community Strong Fund, Canada will invest $4.4 billion over 10 years. Matched by Ontario, a total of $8.8 billion to build the housing-enabling infrastructure and reduce those development charges. This is going to lower upfront costs and create certainty for builders to build the affordable homes so Ontarians can buy and rent. Rental affordability is improving. The rent-income ratio, its lowest level in 6 years. Rent here in Etobicoke for a two-bedroom is down 8.4% compared to last year. I can outlast her.
Mark Carney was heckled during that entire press conference this morning. But so basically what happened here is the federal government and Ontario announced a total of $8.8 billion deal to cut development charges in half for 3 years. Those costs are usually passed on to home buyers, and they're also removing HST on some new homes, which could be over $100,000 in potential savings. And they say that this is going to boost construction and affordability. But here's the problem, is that development charges did not just appear out of nowhere. They are government-imposed costs. So instead of eliminating or permanently reforming those fees, the government has stepped in with billions of taxpayer dollars to offset their own policies. Instead of addressing why housing costs are so high in the province in the first place, which is layers of taxes and fees and regulations imposed by the government, they are giving you a temporary patch funded by you. And here we have a situation where, yet again, affordability is being subsidized. Progress and opportunity is being subsidized and regulated. You know, the government here, and this is another part that I don't think people fully grasp at this point, is once the government expands its role into the economy and state ownership, which we have already seen, the government is no longer regulating, it is deciding outcomes. When your government controls incentives, approvals, regulation, funding, it also quietly determines which industries grow, which shrink, who succeeds, and who never even gets the chance.
But one thing that I really started to notice is that we used to measure progress by opportunity. And somewhere along the line, we started measuring progress by how many people a government program can help. But decline is not a law of nature, it is a choice. I know that the truth is not hateful. I know that fiscal responsibility is not radical, it is sensible. And when people rely on government subsidies and bailouts and programs to survive, the government no longer serves, it owns. And I do believe in responsibility over excuses. I believe in freedom over force and opportunity over engineered dependence.